Have you ever wondered why some women do not need to speak loudly to be heard, nor dress provocatively to be seen, yet their presence lingers like a haunting echo in the minds of men? They are not defined by noise but by silence, not by display but by depth. In their restraint lies an invisible gravity, a pull that binds others without chains. This is the silent power of women. The mysterious force that Viktor Frankl's insights illuminate when placed in dialogue with the feminine archetype. Obsession born not from pursuit but from absence, and meaning born not from gratification but from restraint. Some women embody this paradox without effort. They are not consumed with proving themselves, nor are they frantic in their longing to be desired. Their strength does not arise from performance, but from a hidden covenant with suffering and self-worth. They know something most of the world does not. Silence can be sharper than words, absence heavier than presence, and refusal more intoxicating than acquiescence. Frankl taught that life does not answer our cries. Rather, life questions us, and we must answer with responsibility. Apply this to the realm of attraction, and the dynamic shifts completely. The woman who remains silent in the face of neediness, who refuses to reduce herself to begging for attention, is not passive. She is active in the deepest sense. Her silence becomes her answer. She is telling life, and telling man, that her value does not depend on applause. She does not seek to escape her loneliness through compromise. Instead, she endures the loneliness, and in that endurance, she finds herself. Ask yourself, do you have the courage to remain still when everything in you screams to reach out, to explain, to plead? Can you allow the tension of silence to breathe without collapsing into fear? The woman who dares to hold this tension becomes unforgettable. Why? Because men, accustomed to easy reassurance, suddenly find themselves confronted with a void that demands meaning. In her silence, she forces them to face themselves. Jung observed that the unconscious holds not only instinct, but archetype, mystery, and shadow. The silent woman awakens the masculine unconscious in precisely this way. She becomes a mirror in which he sees both his inadequacy and his longing. Her refusal to pacify him with cheap words presses him to confront his own emptiness. Obsession, then, is not born from her giving too much, but from her withholding just enough. Yet this is not manipulation. It is not a calculated game. It is an existential stance, a mode of being. Frankl insisted that even in the camps, when stripped of everything, human beings retained the freedom to choose their attitude. So too with the feminine. When stripped of validation, when abandoned, when unseen, she retains the freedom to stand with dignity. That freedom is magnetic. It is why men dream of the woman they cannot tame, why they remember the one who did not yield. But silence carries danger. It is not for the weak. Silence can be mistaken for indifference, and it often provokes anger in those who demand constant reassurance. The empowered feminine must learn to endure being misunderstood, even vilified. For men who cannot face themselves will blame her for the discomfort her silence awakens. They will call her cold, cruel, distant. And yet, beneath those accusations lies an undeniable truth. She has touched something raw in them, something they cannot escape. Think of obsession not as love, but as the masculine psyche grappling with its own shadow. The woman who refuses to chase becomes the embodiment of that shadow. She is both desired and feared, longed for and resented. This is why her silent power is so dangerous, because it awakens in him what he would rather avoid. And still, it is precisely this awakening that gives his longing meaning. Without resistance, desire is shallow. Without distance, attraction dissolves. It is the tension, the ache, the silence that creates depth. Frankl argued that suffering, when met with courage, is no longer mere suffering, but meaning. The same is true in love. The suffering of longing, of unanswered questions, of absence. These do not destroy desire, they deepen it. And the woman who can endure silence without surrender becomes the catalyst of this transformation. She does not eliminate suffering, she makes it sacred. But what about her? Does she not also suffer in silence? Of course she does. She feels the pull to explain, to chase, to fill the gap. Yet she resists, and in her resistance she discovers something extraordinary: freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of constant validation. Freedom from the exhausting cycle of pursuit and retreat. Freedom from the need to prove her worth to those who cannot see it. This freedom is not coldness, it is sovereignty. Picture her. She does not argue. She does not beg. She does not demand. She simply remains. Her silence is not emptiness. It is presence in its purest form. Men ache for her words, but she does not speak until she chooses. They long for her presence, but she appears only when it aligns with her meaning. And in this restraint lies her allure. She is not an object to be won, but a mystery to be encountered. The silent power of women is not about withholding for the sake of control. It is about refusing to betray oneself in the name of comfort. It is about choosing dignity over desperation, mystery over explanation, meaning over appeasement. And when this stance is held, not as a tactic but as a way of being, it transforms not only relationships, but the very soul of the woman herself. Yet this is only the beginning. For silence is not the end of feminine power. It is the doorway. Beyond it lies suffering, shadow, and the profound responsibility of choice. What happens when silence collides with obsession? What transformation unfolds when longing becomes unbearable? And what meaning does a woman discover when she stops being an object of desire and becomes the subject of her own destiny? Imagine this. A man finds himself drawn to a woman not because of what she gives him, but because of what she withholds. Her silence unsettles him. It does not reassure. It does not affirm. It does not tell him what he wants to hear. Instead, it leaves a space, a gap in which his own insecurities echo back to him louder than any words she could have spoken. He cannot stop thinking of her, not because she flatters his ego, but because she quietly denies it. This is the paradox of obsession. The more he reaches for certainty, the more elusive she becomes, and the deeper he falls into the abyss of his own longing. Frankl insisted that meaning is not discovered in comfort, but in confrontation with tension. To live fully is to embrace the conflict between what is and what ought to be. The woman who embodies silence becomes an unwitting philosopher of this truth. She holds a man in that very tension, between fulfillment and denial, between presence and absence, between clarity and mystery. He feels both desire and suffering in her presence, and yet it is precisely that suffering that renders his desire meaningful. You may ask yourself, why is silence so powerful? Because silence is the arena where projection thrives. In her silence, he sees not her essence, but his own reflection. His fantasies, his insecurities, his need for affirmation. All of these fill the void she has left unspoken. She becomes a screen for his unconscious, a mirror for his hidden shadow. The more she refuses to clarify, the more he invests her with the weight of his own imagination. This is why he obsesses, why he cannot forget. For he is not obsessed with her alone, he is obsessed with what she awakens in himself. Jung spoke often of the anima, the feminine figure that lives in the masculine unconscious. The silent woman is often confused with this anima projection. She seems larger than life, archetypal, almost otherworldly. Men dream of her, write poems about her, despair over her distance. But in truth, much of what they see is their own soul reflected back. And the silent woman, by refusing to collapse into explanation or defense, allows this projection to take root. She forces him to wrestle with himself, whether he knows it or not. Yet silence alone is not enough. It must be silence rooted in dignity, not in fear. For there is a silence that is weak, born of timidity and repression. That silence is not powerful, it is avoidance. The silent power we speak of here is different. It is chosen. It is the refusal to betray oneself with needless justification. It is the decision to let absence speak, to allow mystery to live, even at the cost of being misunderstood. This silence is not lack of voice. It is the voice of the soul, spoken without words. Do you have the courage to be misunderstood? To let others project their judgments, their criticisms, their desires upon you without rushing to correct them? Can you bear the loneliness of being accused of cruelty simply because you did not soothe someone's insecurity? For this is the cost of silent power. It demands strength enough to endure vilification without losing composure. But in this endurance, a woman transcends the petty games of validation and enters into something far greater: sovereignty over her own meaning. Frankl described freedom as the last of the human liberties, the ability to choose one's attitude regardless of circumstance. Silence is one expression of this freedom. A woman may not control whether she is desired, abandoned, or accused, but she can control whether she compromises her essence to explain herself away. She can choose silence, not as passivity, but as strength. And in that choice, she reminds the world that she is not owned, not defined, not reducible. For the man who encounters such a woman, the experience is disorienting. He cannot conquer her with charm, nor bind her with need. Her silence forces him to face his own inadequacies, his own lack of meaning. Some men rise to this challenge, choosing to grow, to deepen, to wrestle with the emptiness she awakens. Others retreat, lashing out, calling her cold, even accusing her of cruelty. But whether they rise or collapse, the truth remains. She has revealed something in them that words could never touch. And what of the woman herself? She is not unscathed by this dynamic. To embody silent power is to live in tension, to feel the ache of absence in her own body, to long for connection even as she refuses to betray herself. She is not immune to loneliness, nor to the temptation to break her silence for the sake of comfort. Yet every time she resists, she grows stronger. Every time she remains still when she longs to chase, she deepens her own self-respect. Every moment she chooses dignity over desperation, she becomes more radiant, more magnetic, more whole. This radiance is not the soft glow of appeasement, but the fierce flame of sovereignty. It is not the sweetness of constant availability, but the gravity of mystery. Men sense it instinctively. They cannot explain it, but they cannot escape it. The silent woman does not compete, does not chase, does not beg. She remains. And in her remaining, she transforms absence into power, silence into meaning, and suffering into depth. Yet the story does not end here. For silence, while powerful, is only the beginning. Beyond it lies suffering, and in suffering, the potential for transformation. The silent woman not only awakens obsession in men, she awakens meaning in herself. By refusing to break under absence, she learns to transmute pain into dignity. And this transmutation opens the door to something even greater than desire: freedom. Most women are taught to fear silence, to fill every pause with words, to heal every distance with explanations. Yet the woman who discovers her silent power learns that emptiness can be a throne. Her silence is not a void, it is a temple. And within this temple, she discovers the second dimension of her power: the transmutation of suffering into meaning. Viktor Frankl wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. For the feminine, this is more than philosophy. It is initiation. Heartbreak, abandonment, betrayal. These are the crucibles where silent power is tested. A woman who has never walked through the fire of rejection cannot embody the weight of dignity. It is only the woman who has loved and lost, who has been ignored, belittled, or betrayed, and who has endured without begging, who radiates the dangerous beauty of depth. Imagine a woman who has been left waiting, who has felt the sting of absence in her body like hunger. She knows the temptation to reach out, to plead, to ask, why? And yet she resists. She lets the hunger hollow her. She does not run from it. She does not numb it with empty words or shallow substitutes. She allows it to cut her open. And in that opening, she discovers something few ever touch: a self that is untouchable. Her worth does not collapse in the face of rejection. Instead, rejection becomes the fire that forges her unbreakable dignity. Ask yourself, have you ever considered that your deepest wounds might be the birthplace of your power? That the very silence forced upon you by another's absence might be the soil where your sovereignty grows? The temptation is always to numb, to soothe, to chase, to forget. But the woman who endures, who feels her suffering without fleeing, emerges with a strange radiance. This radiance is not naive optimism nor bitter cynicism. It is tragic optimism, the beauty Frankl described, where meaning is carved from pain and suffering is made sacred. Men feel this radiance even if they cannot name it. They sense in such a woman both danger and tenderness, as though she carries the memory of fire in her gaze. She cannot be fooled by superficial promises, for she has seen too much. She cannot be broken by absence, for she has already lived within it. And so she becomes paradoxical, soft enough to nurture, yet hard enough to resist, warm enough to draw near, yet distant enough to unsettle. Jungian depth psychology reveals that power always emerges from integration of the shadow. The silent woman does not deny her rage, her grief, her longing. She does not paint over them with sweetness or hide them under submission. She allows them to exist, to live in her body, but she does not let them consume her. She holds them, transforms them, and in this alchemy, she becomes whole. She is not merely the angel of light nor the demon of darkness. She is both, reconciled into one. This wholeness is what makes her magnetic. Men may not consciously understand it, but unconsciously they know. Such a woman cannot be replaced. Her presence is not a performance, but a reality. She has become a living symbol of individuation, the Jungian journey of becoming one's full self, light and shadow alike. And in her completeness, she awakens in men both awe and fear, attraction and hesitation. For to love such a woman is to be confronted with one's own incompleteness. But silent power is not about men at all. It is about the woman's relationship with herself. For when she endures suffering without collapsing, when she holds silence without apology, when she integrates her shadow without shame, she becomes sovereign. She no longer needs external validation to feel whole. She no longer bargains her worth against another's attention. She is not immune to pain, but she is no longer defined by it. Her very suffering has become her authority. Consider the Stoic philosophers, who taught that the only true freedom lies in what cannot be taken from you, your attitude, your inner stance. Frankl echoed this truth from within the camps. Everything can be stripped away except the freedom to choose one's response. The silent woman embodies this Stoic strength. She may lose love, but not dignity. She may lose companionship, but not sovereignty. She may lose the illusions of safety, but she gains something greater, the unshakable knowledge that she can survive absence without abandoning herself. This is why her silence commands obsession. It is not merely the absence of words, but the presence of dignity. It is not emptiness, it is fullness restrained. Men ache to penetrate that silence, to break it open, to make her yield. But she does not yield easily, for she knows her silence is not weakness but weapon, not passivity but power. And in her restraint, she becomes not an object of desire, but the subject of her own destiny. Yet even sovereignty is not the end of the journey. For once a woman has endured silence and suffering, and discovered meaning in both, she faces a greater task still: detachment. To wield power without being enslaved by it, to inspire obsession without needing it, to choose love without fearing loss. This is the ultimate freedom, the freedom not just to endure, but to transcend. Today, perhaps more than ever, women are told that empowerment means proving, displaying, asserting. Yet the most powerful women in history, literature, and psychology often revealed their influence not through force, but through detachment. Their power lay not in the noise they made, but in the freedom they embodied. And it is here, after silence and suffering have been endured, that the deeper mystery unfolds: the power of detachment. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy rests on a simple but radical truth: that meaning is never given, but discovered in how we respond to what life demands of us. Apply this to feminine psychology, and it becomes clear. A woman's freedom is not in controlling others, but in refusing to let her essence be controlled by their choices. Detachment is not indifference, it is sovereignty. It is the ability to say, you may stay or go, desire or reject, adore or despise, and still, I remain whole. Ask yourself, how many times have you felt chained to another's attention? How often have you measured your worth by their response, your beauty by their gaze? your value by their choice. Each of these chains is invisible, yet heavy. Detachment is the act of breaking them, one by one, until you stand unbound. And in that freedom, something extraordinary happens. You no longer crave obsession, yet it follows you. For nothing is more magnetic than a woman who does not need to be wanted. The masculine unconscious feels this immediately. A man may not articulate it, but he knows. The woman who is free cannot be owned. He may pursue her desperately, precisely because she does not collapse into need. Her detachment awakens his obsession, not because she withholds affection, but because she embodies independence. She does not perform for his approval. She does not shape herself to fit his desire. She allows him to come, but does not cling if he leaves. This terrifies him, and yet it captivates him. Frankl often wrote that life is not about what we expect from it, but what it expects from us. The detached woman mirrors this truth. She does not ask, "What do men give me?" She asks, "What does life require of me? What values demand my loyalty?" This orientation transforms her relationships. She does not sacrifice her standards in exchange for love. She does not negotiate her worth against loneliness. She lives by meaning, not by need. And because she lives by meaning, her love, when freely given, becomes priceless. Jung would call this the integration of anima and animus, the balancing of inner polarities. For the detached woman is not cold. She can nurture. She is not cruel. She can comfort. But she is no longer enslaved by the demand to do so. She chooses. Her tenderness is not given out of fear, but from strength. And because it is chosen, it carries weight. Men sense this distinction immediately. Affection that is forced breeds resentment, but affection that is freely chosen inspires devotion. Do you dare to live without needing to be chosen? Can you stand in the silence of your own independence, even when it costs you admiration, when it leaves you alone at night, when it tempts you to compromise for comfort? For this is the crucible of detachment. To choose meaning over validation, to choose dignity over desperation, to choose truth over compromise. Most will not. Most will trade their sovereignty for fleeting affection, but the few who endure discover a freedom that cannot be taken away. The paradox is profound. The less she needs, the more she is desired. The less she chases, the more she is pursued. The less she explains, the more she is understood. For the silent sovereign woman embodies what Frankl called the will to meaning, the deepest hunger in the human spirit. Men hunger for her, not because she satisfies their desires, but because she forces them to confront their own emptiness. In her detachment, she becomes a question that demands an answer, a riddle that refuses to resolve. And yet, detachment is not the final step. For there is a danger here. The danger of mistaking freedom for pride, sovereignty for isolation, silence for superiority. If a woman clings too tightly to her detachment, she risks becoming imprisoned by it, armored against love, untouchable even to herself. The final secret lies beyond both silence and detachment. It lies in transcendence, in loving without clinging, in giving without losing, in choosing without fearing. This is not the cold power of distance, but the radiant power of wholeness. Picture her now. She has passed through silence, through suffering, through detachment. She no longer needs to prove, to chase, to plead. She no longer fears loneliness, for she has learned to sit with it. She no longer bargains her dignity, for she knows it is priceless. And now she stands at the threshold of transcendence. She is free not only from others, but even from herself, from the ego's hunger, from the shadow's fear, from the chains of pride. She is ready, at last, to love without losing herself. The woman who reaches this stage becomes more than magnetic. She becomes transformative. Her presence alters those around her. She does not demand change, yet men change in her orbit. She does not preach, yet her silence speaks volumes. She does not chase meaning, for she has become meaning itself. And those who meet her, whether they fear her, desire her, or flee from her, cannot escape her impact. For she has become what Frankl described, a life lived as a response, not a plea. A soul that transforms suffering into strength absence into power, and love into freedom. Some women are remembered not for their words, but for the way they carried themselves through absence, through suffering, through silence. They leave behind an imprint not of noise, but of depth. Men remember them years later, not because they were easy to win, but because they were impossible to forget. This is the final stage of feminine sovereignty, transcendence. Viktor Frankl wrote that life is never primarily about what we expect from it, but about what life expects from us. For the woman who has passed through silence and suffering, through the trials of detachment, life expects more than mere independence. It expects her to transcend her own defenses, to move beyond pride, beyond the armor of mystery, into a love that is both fearless and free. For true power is not simply in withholding, nor in inspiring obsession. True power lies in the ability to give without losing oneself. Imagine her now. She is no longer bound by the need to be chosen, nor by the temptation to prove herself. She can enter love without fear because love is no longer her master. She can walk away without resentment because absence no longer threatens her worth. She can endure misunderstanding, criticism, and even vilification because her dignity does not depend on the shifting winds of perception. She has become sovereign, not only in the eyes of men, but in the depths of her own soul. Ask yourself, what would it mean to live this way? To give affection, not because you fear abandonment, but because it flows naturally from your abundance. To love without bargaining your dignity. To let go without bitterness. To remain without clinging. This is not weakness, it is the highest form of freedom. For as the Stoics taught, the only true possession we have is our attitude, our inner stance. And as Frankl declared, even in the most extreme deprivation, this last freedom cannot be taken. The woman who embodies this truth radiates an aura that is more than attraction. It is transformation. Men in her presence are forced to confront themselves. They sense in her both tenderness and strength, intimacy and mystery. She does not play the role of muse or mother, temptress or healer. She simply is. And in her authenticity, she calls others to authenticity as well. She demands, without demanding, that those around her rise to meet her with the same courage she has cultivated within herself. Jung would describe this as individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, love and detachment. The transcendent woman no longer denies any part of herself. She does not suppress her longing, nor does she allow it to enslave her. She does not reject her need for connection, but she no longer worships it as her source of worth. She integrates it all, and in that integration, she becomes complete. This completeness is the ultimate source of her silent power. She no longer inspires obsession because she withholds, but because she embodies what every soul secretly seeks: wholeness. To encounter her is to encounter meaning itself, the very thing Frankl identified as the deepest human drive. Men may confuse it with desire, but in truth it is reverence. They long not merely to possess her, but to touch the freedom she embodies, the dignity she radiates, the mystery she carries. Yet her true victory is not in the obsession she awakens in others, but in the peace she awakens within herself. For obsession fades, desire shifts, admiration wanes. But the woman who has discovered her silent power does not depend on these. She has built her throne in the only place it cannot be toppled, her own soul. She can love deeply without fear, suffer without despair, and stand alone without collapse. Her silence has become her song, her suffering her crown, her detachment her liberation, and her transcendence her rebirth. And so we arrive at the final truth. The silent power of women is not about control, nor about dominance, nor about inspiring endless longing. It is about sovereignty. It is about living as Frankl urged, not asking what life owes us, but asking what life expects of us, and answering with dignity. It is about integrating shadow and light, suffering and joy, desire and detachment, until one emerges not merely as desired, but as whole. The woman who knows this no longer chases. She no longer begs. She no longer compromises her worth for temporary affection. She chooses. And in her choosing, she embodies the greatest mystery of all: freedom through meaning, love through detachment, power through silence. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.